What's your greatest fear? For some, it's as simple as drowning. For others, the unknown when it comes to viruses and diseases. I'm going to educate you on the latter. I'm going to give you the breakdown on HIV and show you that fear is not only not necessary, but it actually hinders moving forward. Over the past 6 years, I've worked with organizations that do research and aid for people afflicted with HIV, so I consider myself fairly attenuated with this project. I want to help destigmatize HIV, but to do that in a way that educates people to what the virus actually is and what it does. So let's get started by breaking down what HIV actually is. Human immunodeficiency virus, also known as HIV, is a virus that attacks the white blood cells in the system that fight infection. AIDS is the final stage of HIV, but for people that don't know the difference, they tend to be one and the same. Put simply, the virus attaches itself to white blood cells and inserts itself inside to incubate. Once the virus is incubated to capacity, the white blood cells burst open and the virus is released into the bloodstream. If it continues to do this, the body ends up having a lower white blood cell count, a higher virus count, which leads to a viral load. A big factor in HIV transmission, moving the virus from one person to another. Now, most people just assume it's as easy as kissing someone or sharing a class, but unfortunately, it's nowhere near that. There are only 4 different types of fluids which HIV can be dispersed in, and that is semen, blood, vaginal fluid, and breast milk. The virus itself has a unique structure, so once it's outside of the body and in contact with oxygen, it dies. Now, most people view HIV as a gay disease, but it has quite a far reach in the heterosexual community as well. Here's a chart provided by the CDC that breaks down the subpopulation of HIV contractions in 2017. To be fair, the majority of the top half of the chart is male, or homosexual. The lower half is heterosexual, so it ends up showing that HIV does not really balance on just being gay or straight. The next chart that's provided gives those same transmission rates by age. So it shows that regardless of whether 13 to 24 or over 65, HIV does not just settle into one demographic. So now that we've discussed the medical portion of HIV, let's talk about the history. Although the first verifiable case of HIV in the United States was in the 1980s, there was an incident that set all of this in motion earlier on in the 60s. Robert R., a 16-year-old teenager, was admitted to a hospital with many of the symptoms of what we now know to be HIV. At the current time, doctors had no idea what was going on. They couldn't make heads or tails of the situation. Shortly after that, he passed away, and doctors kept living tissue samples to make sure that they could end up figuring out if it could help anything else later. Part of the reason HIV spread like wildfire was that there was no test against it. In addition to that, penicillin. Now, most people find this a life-saving medication. The start of penicillin being used, people just kind of had a free-for-all, it could cure anything, so why did they need to worry? The 60s, that love everyone genre, that's kind of what built this into what it is. Soon after the 60s ended, 70s started, and it could only be described as terror. People had no idea what they were coming down with, doctors didn't know what they were working with. It was a big mess. Over the last decade or two, medical improvements have caused HIV medications to be made to the point where people can live everyday lives with it. It's essentially the same as diabetes. Take a pill, you're good. Go in every couple months, have some blood work done, everything's fine. So since we've covered the past, let's step into the present and dispel some of the stigma around HIV. U equals U. It's a campaign that started a few years ago, and it's a big factor in trying to get rid of the fear-mongering that comes along with HIV. It stands for undetectable, means untransmittable. It means that the amount of HIV or viral load in your body is so low that medicine can't detect it, means it's untransmittable to anyone else that you have intercourse or anything like that with. Right here are the categories of sex, pregnancy, syringes, breastfeeding, things that could transfer HIV to another person, and the CDC's results right here of how they would be affected. Now, most people would take anything like this with a grain of salt, just believing HIV is going to be passed anyway. Because the CDC is backing this, it has helped tremendously to push this to the forefront of things that people can finally get behind. Another stigma with HIV is that it is a death warrant. Over the past decade or so, scientists have knocked out hundreds of medications or retrovirals that block the virus from repopulating in the body. The effects that this has had have been enormous. People can live a full, long life now. There's no issues with it. Truvada, which actually this blue pill right here, is more commonly known as PrEP. PrEP is for people who have HIV and also those who don't. It stops the virus from interacting with your white blood cells. Similar to girls taking birth control. Every day it's something that helps block your system. So while many people find the topic of HIV a bit taboo, I hope that this little demonstration has shown you that there's a different side of the story. Diseases such as HIV are only scary if you do not know what's going on with them. Something so small that we need a microscope to view should not be something that makes us ignorant and fear. As FDR once said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.